Welcome back, fabulous fourth grade teachers. It is time to dig into Module 4. Today we're going to be reviewing Numerical Reasoning Standard 2 and Patterning and Algebraic Reasoning Standard 3. Just a reminder, our math standards timeline is going to be stretched out over the next 3 years. The first 2 years, we're going to be participating in professional learning with the goal of understanding these new standards. And by school year 2023-2024, we will begin with full implementation. First question of the day, do you have a math mindset? That's such a powerful question, not only for us as educators, but also for our teachers. My first experience in an educational math class revolved around this whole idea of a growth mindset, but more specifically teaching a growth mindset. And are your students learning with a growth mindset? But I think it's just as important for us to ask the question to ourselves, are we teaching math with a growth mindset? How can we expect our students to adopt this philosophy if we don't as well? A key to mathematical understanding is having an open mind and being open to failure as well as challenges. Throughout this module, we're going to talk about different strategies and activities that can be used to promote this math mindset or this growth mindset within mathematics. In Module 3, we talked about numerical reasoning. It encompasses place value rounding, comparison, addition, subtraction, multiplicative comparison, multiplication, as well as division of whole numbers. When we were reviewing this in Module 3, we were specifically focusing on standard NR1. Today, we are going to be focusing on standard NR2 and its different expectations, or as we previously referred to them as substandards. Module, I'm going to include this learning progression. It's going to be really important for you to note the vertical progression of the standards, specifically in 3rd to 5th grade, as 3rd grade directly impacts what our students are going to come to us knowing, and we are going to directly impact what our students go into 5th grade knowing. In this module, we're going to be focusing on the key concepts of computational fluency, addition and subtraction, and multiplication and division. So I'm going to pause the video so you guys can take a second to look at the learning progression, specifically in those 3 areas for grades 3 through 5. So let's review our standards documents. The standards will be found at the top of the document with the expectations, or substandard as we formerly knew it, and evidence of learning below. It's just a reminder that the evidence of learning is going to be very helpful when planning for instruction. That's going to be the piece that's going to give you those phrases and to explain to you the importance of making it relevant for student learning, or giving you vocabulary terms that you might need as the teacher to teach the standards to its full intent, or even vocabulary terms that your students need in order to understand the standards. My favorite part, I think, is the examples, because those examples are very clear, cut, and dry. Like, you know exactly what your students are going to be expected to do. And I really like that. That's very helpful for me when planning instruction, to know exactly what the expectation of the standard is. I know we've spent a lot of time as a county and as grade level teams discussing and analyzing standards trying to determine what exactly they're asking for. And these new standards, they spend a lot of time helping us solve that problem and really going into a lot of detail on what the expectations are going to be for students. Follow the live link in the last section of this video, on the section that's titled Resources. It's going to take you to the K-8 standards document, and on that you will be able to review the appendix for sections like strategies and methods. So as you can see on 4NR 2.5, in strategies and methods, it says see special note and appendix. And if you go to page 123 in that document, it's going to break down the different operations and why and how students should be solving them or representing their answers for their problems. Guys, let's dig in. Numerical reasoning standard 2. Students will be using part-whole strategies, solving problems involving addition and subtraction through the hundred thousands place, as well as multiplication and division of multi-digit whole numbers presented in real-life mathematical situations. This standard encompasses our addition and subtraction expectations, as well as multiplication and division. Once we dig in a little deeper, you will see that each of those different pieces are broken down by expectations. I do want to note some key vocabulary words that are listed in this standard. The biggest one to me that stands out is real life mathematical situations. And you will notice as we continue that language and those terms come up frequently. So a big part of these new standards is students being able to make connections to the math that they're doing. When students are making connections, when they understand that it's a real life situation, they're not only more engaged, but it's also more applicable. So it gives it a meaning for the learning. Numerical reasoning 2, expectation 1, students are expected to fluently add and subtract multi-digit whole numbers to solve practical mathematical problems, use place value understanding and properties of operations and relationships between those operations. The word practical is very specific and lets us know that we need to connect these types of problems to real life situations. Note that the standard algorithm is not included in the emphasis, and the emphasis is now shifted to understanding place value in order to add and subtract. Part of the fundamentals of this standard are to make the problems students are solving relevant to them. There are 2 examples included for NR2 expectation 1. The Beyblade activity found on the left is one that was used this school year as an instructional piece while teaching addition. The whole idea was that students would spin the bays and each student would time how long the bay would spin. The whole goal was to see, after multiple attempts, which student can make their bay spin the longest. When they combined their attempts, they were using the addition part of this standard. And then they would find their final score, and that would let us know who was the winner. I love using the interest of students to engage them in learning. It gives them a vested interest in the activity. Beyblades were hugely popular in my classroom at the beginning of the school year. So this was a very logical activity for them to do. And even the students who weren't into Beyblades were very into the fact that they were up out of their seats and it was very engaging. The whole activity with the bays out and spinning them only took about 10 minutes. We spent the bulk majority of the class adding our totals and discussing why and whose bay spun the longest. And we were able to chart this using a graph. So we were able to kind of pull in some other standards as we were reviewing this activity. The second activity is a Desmos activity. And Desmos is a new to me resource that was introduced to me in MathCon over the summer. So if you attend any of the amazing math seminars that are being sent out to us by the state, Desmos will probably be brought up. That is something that they were very excited for teachers to use. It's made to be like playing a game for students. So the questions are given to them and they're usually somewhat open-ended or broad. And they're incredibly rigorous and they cause students to think on a very high level. This particular activity is a really great introduction activity for addition and subtraction. If you could, please take a minute, pause the video, and go and complete this activity as part of this module. I think you guys will really like Desmos. I will say for elementary ed, they are constantly adding new resources, but it's definitely has a large bank of middle and high school resources, but they are adding more for elementary school teachers. There's also some really cool activities there for fractions that could be used in a 4th grade classroom. So I would definitely highly suggest not only completing this activity, but checking out Desmos. it's free to make an account. Reasoning 2, expectation 2, students will be expected to interpret, model, and solve problems involving multiplicative comparison. Again, in this standard, relevancy is mentioned. It is going to be so essential that we create engaging math classrooms so learning can thrive. We want students to be connected to what they're learning because, as I said before, if they're making those connections and they're engaged and they understand the purpose of it, they're going to retain the information so much better, and it will help create lifelong learners. When students are digging into multiplicative comparison, we want them to be able to demonstrate the relationships between the numbers. Students should start by using concrete materials, then transition to drawings, and finally equations. So in the example, Mara has 4 pencils. Josh has 3 times as many pencils as Mara. How many pencils does Josh have? Students could clearly either use manipulatives or even draw a picture for this. They could literally draw Mara having 4 pencils and then showing the 3 times as many for Josh, which would in the end create like an array, and it would show that Josh has 12 pencils because he has 3 times as many as 4. Standard NR 2.2 sets the foundation for this standard. Multiplicative comparison, specifically using arrays, is going to help students understand the modeling of numerical reasoning 2 expectation 3. This standard covers the multiplication of numbers with up to 4 digits by 1-digit whole number, as well as 2 by 2-digit numbers, using strategies based on place value. This standard goes on to explicitly state that students need to illustrate and explain this by using equations, arrays, and area models. Students should be able to understand this and solve this using a variety of strategies. You will note that standard algorithm is not one of the strategies listed. It is very important that students understand at a conceptual level how to multiply using place value before they are introduced to standard algorithm. When solving multiplication problems, a great way to apply an understanding of place value is to use area model. When teaching this strategy, make the clear connection to arrays, which they will have used in 3rd grade to solve multiplication problems, as well as in standard NR 2.2 to solve multiplicative comparison. Students will also be using what they learned in standard 4 NR1 to solve these problems as well. Specifically multiplying by tens and multiples of 10. This standard is you're going to see a clear connection to the prior standards that we've learned, but you will also notice that as we progress through the standards, they're going to build on each other to help students understand at a deeper level. Numerical reasoning 2, expectation 4. Students should solve authentic division problems with a 4-digit dividend and a 1-digit divisor. Place value is also a really key part of this expectation, and students are going to be expected to use place value to solve division problems. They are not expected to use long division or the standard algorithm to solve division problems at this level. Students are going to be expected to use their knowledge of place value to break apart their numbers to then divide and solve the problem. We're going to review 2 different examples on how to solve a division problem using place value. The first one is partial quotient. And using partial quotient, students begin by breaking their dividend up based on place value, as well as math facts that they already know. This is going to create a problem that's more easily solvable. And it's also going to be based in their foundation of knowledge. The point is that students are going to gain an understanding of place value and its relationship to division. This is going to help them later on as they begin to solve more complex problems using division. So for example, an average 4th grade student is going to know that 4 times 5 is 20. Therefore, 4 times 500 is 2,000. And as they subtract down their dividends and they get as close to 0 as possible, they're going to be getting small quotients. And at the end, they're going to add those quotients together to get their total quotient, hence the name partial quotient. You are finding parts of the quotient to find the total quotient. In this case, the answer is 911. The second example we're going to review is that Antonio won a jar of 373 jelly beans in a school contest. He wants to share them. He and his 7 friends will share them. How many jelly beans will each of the friends get? It gives a possible solution. In this possible solution, it's broken down into 320 divided by 8 plus 40 divided by 8 plus 13 divided by 8. The goal here is that students are going to know what 320 divided by 8 is based on math facts and 40 divided by 8 is based on math facts. But then they're going to get to 13 divided by 8 and they're going to realize that that's not going to give them a whole number answer or a whole number quotient. So students are going to be introduced and start to understand what a remainder is and how to interpret it. So in this case, each friend is going to get 46 jelly beans, but there are going to be 5 left over. So when asked the question, how many jelly beans each of the friends will get, the answer is simply 46 jelly beans. But it's important that students understand that there are 5 left over. Numerical reasoning, standard 2, expectation 5. Students are going to be solving word problems that involve the 4 operations. They will also need to be able to use mental math to determine if their answers are reasonable. A great way to encourage this skill from day one would be to institute daily or weekly number talks. If you introduce this standard to students from the beginning, using numbers and problems that they're familiar with, this is going to encourage their thinking, and it's going to help them progress as they develop a deeper understanding of the 4th grade standards. So it would be very easy to go ahead and begin introducing multi-step problems at the very beginning of the school year using activities and problems related to what they learned in 3rd grade. This would also act as a great spiral review throughout the year to have them continue to practice the skills that they've been learning. In patterning and algebraic reasoning, students will be using patterns, input-output tables, and they will be expected to understand factors and multiples as well as prime and composite numbers. In the patterning and algebraic reasoning learning progression chart, note that from 3rd grade, students are expected to make predictions based on patterns, to then grow into 4th grade to be representing and describing those said patterns. In this module, we will be reviewing Patterning and Algebraic Reasoning Standard 3, Generate and Analyze patterns including those involving shapes, input-output diagrams, factors, multiples, prime numbers, as well as composite numbers. There are 4 expectations we will be reviewing with patterning and algebraic reasoning. Included in this standards document are visual examples of expectations 1 and 2. As you can see, the evidence of student learning includes examples for 3 out of the 4 expectations. And in expectation 4, they're sure to include vocabulary terms that are essential for both teacher and student for understanding of this standard. Patterning and algebraic reasoning, standard 3, expectation 1, generate both number and shape patterns that follow a provided rule. It's important to note that students are not expected to determine the rule, but rather extend the pattern. In this example, students are asked to use the rule, multiply by 3 and add 1 to find the next 2 stages in the following growing pattern. This is a great example for showing how students can model the math. They could visually draw the next 2 stages in order to see what the pattern is. This gives them a chance to model math and to show that they understand it. In patterning and algebraic reasoning, standard 3, expectation 2, students will use input-output rules, tables, and charts to represent and describe patterns. They will find relationships and solve problems. Students should be able to analyze numerical patterns and use input-output tables. In PAR 3.1, students were expected to model or draw the next pattern. In PAR 3.2, point 2, students are now expected to not only look at a visual model, but also input it in a chart. Patterning and algebraic reasoning, standard 3, expectation 3. Find factor pairs in the range of 1 to 100 and find multiples of single-digit numbers up to 100. Students should be able to recognize that a whole number is a multiple of each of its factors. A good way to help facilitate that discussion is a number talk. Number talks will encourage students to solve in many different ways. It will also create a space where students can discuss the multiple factors of a number, and it's an organic conversation rather than direct instruction. During those number talks, it's really important to discuss and highlight the different ways students see math. I love using something like the how many with the Krispy Kreme donuts. Krispy Kreme donuts are delicious, and students love the idea of counting donuts in a tray, especially that many donuts. It will also connect back to arrays, multiplicative comparison, as well as multiplication. So students are going to be able to make a lot of connections to what they've already learned to this standard. Patterning and algebraic reasoning, standard 3, expectation 4. Identify composite and prime numbers and explain the relationship with factor pairs. Over the years, I've noticed that students don't always understand the purpose of prime numbers. If you scan the QR code on the left, it's going to take you to a website that has real-life examples of prime numbers. It gives you examples from engineering, coding, and even insects in nature. This is a great way to introduce prime numbers to a classroom full of kids. It gives them several different topics that they're engaged in, and they can see how and why prime numbers are used in the real world. On the right-hand side, you can see a hundreds chart that's labeled prime and composite numbers. This activity would be done with a highlighter with your class, or even shaded with a pencil lightly. What students would do is they would find the multiples of the numbers in the chart. So you would start with 2, find all the multiples of 2. They'll notice that that creates a pattern, that every second column is shaded. Then they'll find the multiples of 3, and they'll notice the pattern that goes diagonal across the board. Then the multiples of 4, they will realize that are all already highlighted because 4 is a multiple of 2. Then they will get to 5, and they will notice that the entire 5 column and the entire 10 column is highlighted. And as they progress through their numbers up into 10, they will start to pick up on the patterns in the numbers as far as multiples go, but then they will also be left with some boxes that are white, some numbers that are not highlighted in. Those students will start to pick up that those are prime numbers. Those are numbers that only have one factor pair, one in itself. This will create a visual model for students to make a connection to prime and composite numbers, but it will also directly connect it back to factor pairs, especially when they see the patterns being created by the different numbers. Okay, so some resources that are available to you guys are the learning progressions. So you can look at the learning progression through the grade levels to see what students should come to you knowing, but also what the expectation is for students going into the next grade. In the middle is the summary of changes, and on pages 28 through 33, it will highlight specifically the summary of changes for 4th grade. And lastly, our K-8 standards. Specifically on page 123 through 126 is going to take you to the appendix where it's going to show you strategies for multiplication, division, and addition and subtraction. And it's going to explain why those place value strategies are necessary for our students to learn. Major takeaways from Module 4. Relevant activities keep students engaged, and if students are engaged, students are learning. Having a math mindset as a teacher will help your students to have a math mindset as well. The standard algorithm is not used for addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. Instead, students need to use place value strategies to solve these operations. Don't forget to complete the Desmos activity from earlier in the video. Also, you're going to be asked to do one of two things at the end of this module. You can either submit a resource that you have used and that you love and you know will be fantastic to teach these standards, or ask a question that pertains to what we've learned thus far in the modules.